Hello and welcome to another tier list video. Today we are taking a look at the Avatar: The Last Airbender's characters once again. The first time I looked at it, I just looked at, how much do I like the character, how much value do I feel like they add to the show. This time we're taking a little bit different approach. We are looking at strength. If, this character got into a fight, how well would they be able to hold their own? How well could they fight, whether using their strength, their creativity, their ingenuity, or their creations. So starting us off, we have Avatar Aang. I mean, this one is pretty easy. I mean, he's the Avatar. Even outside of the Avatar state, he's, one of the most powerful people in the entire, Avatar universe. Aang, sure, at the beginning of the show, obviously he's pretty weak, but by the end of the show, I'm going to be looking at, where characters are at the end of Season 3. And at the end of Season 3, there's no one quite as powerful as Aang. Definitely a very easy S tier. Up next, we have Katara. By the end of the show, definitely a master waterbender. You might even say one of the best waterbenders in the world, if not the best. And of course, she has bloodbending as well. Now, waterbending I think is pretty good, but it's not exactly, I don't know, my favorite type of bending. I think it's cool, but it definitely can be pretty powerful, especially if you are a bloodbender, which of course Katara is. And I would put her up on the S tier for that, but Katara really doesn't like using bloodbending. She, of course, only used it twice, once against Hama, and the other time against the man who killed her mother. Because, obviously she really hates doing it. She makes that clear in the show. So if she was more willing to bloodbend, I would put her in the S tier, because I think that would make her, maybe even more powerful than the Avatar outside of the Avatar state. But because she doesn't like to do it, I'm just going to be looking at her waterbending strength. She's still really powerful, and she will find herself up in the A tier, but not quite breaking into that S tier for me. Up next, we have Sokka. What can I say? One of my favorite characters in the show, but when it comes to just purely fighting, Sokka is not exactly at his best. He's at his best when, he's being a leader, coming up with creative ideas and inventions. And sure, he is a, reasonably strong fighter with a sword by the end, but he's not exactly a master of really any style of fighting. So Sokka, I would say, for his ingenuity and his creativity that he comes up with in battles, I'll give him some points for that. But in terms of pure fighting, he's not the best. But he will still land himself in the B tier just because he comes up with some really creative ways to, start fights, to do things. So he earns himself some points for sure. Up next, we have Toph. And in my opinion, Toph is the best Earthbender. Outside of Aang in the Avatar state, I would say Toph is the best non-Avatar Earthbender ever, really. I mean, she invented metal bending. Like, how cool is that? And, at the end of Season 3, she's the only one who knows how to metal bend. So she is by far the strongest and most powerful Earthbender, in my opinion. And honestly, she's just awesome. I love Toph. You could say, maybe she has a little bit of a weakness because she's blind, so she can't really see things in the air that well. But honestly, she's still too powerful. I gotta put her up in the S tier. Up next, we have Appa. Appa, obviously, just in terms of pure brute force and strength, is super powerful. I mean, we see him, bust his head through walls. So he's pretty strong, but I would say Appa's biggest downfall is also one of his strengths, which is his size. He's a pretty big target, and which means he can be taken down kind of easily by certain things. I mean, we saw the Shearshu that June rode was able to take down Appa, just in a few licks. So Appa is definitely, in terms of his power, is really, really powerful, but his weaknesses are also pretty sizable as well, but still really strong and will find himself in a very solid B tier. Up next, we have Momo. You guys know where Momo is going. I mean, this one is obvious. Momo gotta be up in the S tier. Needs no further explanation. Done. Going to the next one. Next up, we have Jet. In terms of a fighter, he's not, the best, but he is, someone who can really hold his own. He uses those hooks for weapons, which I think are actually pretty cool. Not really something, you see used as weapons in many shows or cartoons even. So I think Jet is a pretty good fighter. We see him taking on some of the Dai Li agents in the Season 2. And I would say overall, Jet is a pretty strong fighter, can hold his own. I would say probably even a stronger fighter than Sokka, but doesn't really have the creativity or ingenuity he has. But his, pure strength in combat, I will say, will be enough to put him up in the B tier. Up next, we have Longshot. Honestly, we don't really see too much of Longshot actually fighting. We see him firing a couple arrows here or there, but not really anything too crazy. Seems like he's a decent fighter, but I feel like bow and arrow in the in the Avatar universe isn't the most powerful weapon. So Longshot gonna find himself down in the C tier. Up next, we have Pipsqueak. I mean, if you just look at this guy or listen to his voice, this is basically the Hulk become human in the Avatar universe. I mean, this guy is as jacked as he is cracked. I'm pretty sure I once saw him crush a child's skull just in the palm of his hand just by squeezing it. So, Pipsqueak, honestly, terrifying. Definitely going to be up in the S tier. Belongs up there for sure. Up next, we have Smellerbee. I'll be honest, I don't think I actually ever see Smellerbee fight. I could be wrong on this, but honestly, Smellerbee doesn't seem like the best fighter. Don't really see the the usefulness that she has in a fight. So Smellerbee, unfortunately, gonna find herself down in the F tier. Really nothing positive to say about her in a fight because we don't really see too much. Last of the Freedom Fighters is the Duke. Now the Duke is pretty small, and anytime you name yourself the Duke, you're clearly compensating for your lack of combat ability. So the Duke also gonna find himself down in the F tier as well. Up next, we have Suki. Honestly, not a bender, but in terms of like pure non-bender fighting, I think Suki is pretty strong, can really hold her own, very clearly a talented fighter. So she's gonna find herself up in the A tier. Up next, we have King Boomy. I absolutely love King Boomy. I mean, he might be my favorite, if not my second favorite, character in the show. And Boomy, he's just so funny, and also he's a super powerful earthbender. I mean, when you see him take off his robe, he is completely jacked. He's got like a 16-pack on his abs. I mean, he knows what he's doing. He's a strong earthbender. Retook the entire city of Amashu during an eclipse. So King Boomy, definitely going to be another S tier. Up next, we have Zuko. Definitely a really powerful firebender by the end of the show. Not quite up there with some of the other firebenders, but still powerful nonetheless. Honestly, like Zuko, strong character, but just going to be a solid A tier for me. Up next, we have Iroh. I mean, come on, you guys already know where Iroh is going to be. He's probably one of, if not the most powerful firebender that we see. He can shoot lightning, he can redirect lightning. Just, in combat, you don't want to get in a fight with Iroh. You're going to lose. Iroh, definitely going to be another S tier. Up next, we have Monk Gyatso. Now, we don't actually see Monk Gyatso in a fight specifically, but we do know that he's a very powerful airbending master. And, of course, we do see when, Aang, Sokka, and Katara return to one of the air temples where Monk Gyatso was. Aang finds a skeleton, and he's surrounded by, 4 or 5 dead firebenders. So, he's clearly pretty powerful, so based off that, we can assume that he's a strong, airbender and that he's good in combat, but because we don't actually see him, I'm just going to put him in the B tier. I think he'd probably belong in the A tier, but we don't actually see him specifically fighting, so I feel like I can't give him too much of a ranking, much higher than B tier. Up next, we're getting into some of the Avatar past lives. We have Avatar Kyoshi. I mean, of course, you guys know this, pretty much any Avatar is going to be up in the S tier. I mean, Avatar Kyoshi literally separates her island off the mainland continent of the Earth Kingdom. I'm sure she uses in the Avatar state, but even outside the Avatar state, I'm sure she was, just as powerful. I think she's supposedly one of the strongest earthbending avatars that there ever was. So, yeah, Avatar Kyoshi gonna be up in the S tier. Up next, we have Avatar Roku. Once again, super powerful. Any avatar in the Avatar state gonna be up in the S tier, and Roku is really no different. Gonna find himself up there as well. Up next, we have Azula. Now, in terms of just pure strength and talent, she's clearly a really powerful firebender, but she makes up a little bit in terms of strength, but she lacks a bit in, I would say, intelligence and forethought in battle. As we can see, that's kind of her downfall later on. She focuses more on pure strength and damage rather than, thinking things through in battle. So Azula, definitely a strong fighter, but I would say, she definitely has her flaws in battle, which we can see in the final Agni Kai, and sure, you can say that's partially due to her mental slipping a little bit, but Azula gonna find herself still in a solid B tier, but not quite up in that A tier. Up next, we have Mai. Honestly, I'm a bit underwhelmed by Mai's fighting capabilities. I think she's, strong and cool, but, throwing little, I don't even know what it is, little miniature blades, doesn't seem that effective. And of course, Avatar is a PG show, so they're not gonna, show them stabbing people. So really all she does is pin people to walls, which doesn't really seem that powerful. So she will find herself down in the C tier, actually. Up next, we have Ty Lee. Honestly, we see the potential of Ty Lee. Literally, she takes down Azula in 2 or 3 punches, completely paralyzes her, prevents her from bending. So Ty Lee is a force to be reckoned with. Definitely would not want to get in a fight with her, and she will be a very solid A tier. Up next, we have Combustion Man. Of course, or Sparky Boom Man, depending on whether you ask Sokka or the rest of the people. But yeah, Combustion Man, honestly, really powerful. Another one who is super powerful, but you know, his biggest strength is just power, and then his weakness is, you know, doesn't really seem like the smartest person in the world. And you know, he gets defeated by a boomerang, so come on. So yeah, I would say he's really strong, but does have his weaknesses, so he'll find himself in the B tier. Up next, we have Cabbage Man. Now, Cabbage Man is a hard one to quantify because we didn't really see him fighting too often, but anyone who, you know, carries that many cabbages all day has got to be pretty strong, so Cabbage Man, he'll find himself in a respectable C tier. Up next, we have Paku. Of course, a water-bending master, but honestly, he gets, like, beaten by Katara by, like, the end of Katara's, you know, water-bending training, which, sure, Katara is obviously very talented, but it makes me more so think that Paku is really not that good of a waterbending master. I mean, he's good, don't get me wrong, but not really blowing me away too much, and he'll find himself in, I would say a B tier, because we do see him when he's retaking Ba Sing Se do some pretty good stuff, but yeah, it doesn't impress me too much. Up next, we have Hakoda, of course, Sokka and Katara's father. As far as a non-bender goes, definitely a pretty strong fighter. We see him do a lot of damage during the siege of, you know, the Fire Nation during the eclipse. So I would say another pretty strong fighter. You know, doesn't really do anything too crazy, just really well-rounded, really smart, and I'm gonna find himself in a very solid B tier. Up next, we have Hama, of course, a waterbender. Probably not the most powerful waterbender in the world, but she is a bloodbender. She invented bloodbending, I believe, so yeah, Hama, pretty much just because she can bloodbend and she's willing to bloodbend, gonna find herself in a very solid A tier. Up next, we have Haru. Honestly, kind of a weak earthbender from what we've seen. I mean, of course, he's, you know, still learning it, but not really the strongest. Not the weakest by any means, and he is, of course, a bender, so he's still got something over most other non-benders, but in terms of his earthbending prowess, it's really pretty weak, so he's gonna find himself down in the D tier. Up next, we have Zhang. Honestly, just a beast of a character. I really like him in the show, and seeing him at his full potential in the the retaking of Ba Sing Se with the White Lotus is just so cool to watch. Very powerful firebender. Yeah, really not too much to say about him. Just really solid firebender. Doesn't blow me away with what he does, but very powerful, and he'll find himself in a very solid B tier as well. Up next, we have June. Now, on her own, probably not the most powerful character, but of course, I'm going to count her along with her Shirshu. And the Shirshu is a force to be reckoned with. As we can see, takes down Appa in just like a couple licks. And, you know, other people in just one lick. So, pretty strong, I would say. Not, of course, not a bender, but I would say still a very decent fighter, and she will find herself in the B tier as well. Up next, we have Long Fang. Now, in terms of intelligence and decision making, this guy is clearly pretty smart. He's great at manipulating other people and the Earth King in particular, but in terms of pure bending, we don't really see him do too much great stuff. It seems like most of the time when he's like fighting, you know, Aang and the rest of the gang, it seems like he's letting the Dai Li agents deal with more of this stuff, which makes me think that he's in his position not because he's, you know, a great earthbender, but more so just because he's smart and manipulative. So in terms of fighting prowess, we really don't see too much great stuff, and once it really comes down to it, he gets captured fairly easily. So Long Fang gonna find himself down in the C tier. Up next, we have the Mechanist. Of course, the Mechanist, not a fighter at all, but I am going to count some of his inventions. You know, if you're in a fight, you're going to be using your inventions, and the Mechanist comes up with some pretty good stuff. So, you know, of course, not a fighter at all, but with his inventions, I think he can hold his own in some ways. So he's going to find himself in the C tier. Up next, we have Ozai. Now, of course, we don't really see Ozai in a fight outside of the, you know, the Sozin's comment in the final episode, which obviously he's very powerful there, but so are all firebenders. And they kind of talk about how he's like, you know, the most powerful firebender in the world, but we don't really see too much of that, but he's clearly pretty strong. You know, almost takes down Aang, of course, so it's hard for me to give him a really solid ranking because we don't really see him fight outside of Sozin's comment, but from what we do see, he seems like he knows what he's doing, and I think he's going to earn himself a spot in the A tier. Up next, we have Master Piandao, of course, the sword master who teaches Sokka. Honestly, another non-bender, but I would say yet another really strong fighter. Clearly, master swordsman. I think he's probably the best swordsman in the world. Of course, being a non-bender, you're always going to be at a disadvantage compared to some other masters, but I think he would be able to hold himself up pretty well in most fights, and I think he's earned himself a spot in the B tier as well. Up next, we have Firelord Sozin. Yeah, I would say we don't really see him fighting too much, but we do see, or I guess we hear about some of the things that he did and how he led the invasion against the air nomads to wipe them out using, what was then named after him, Sozin's Comet. So, like I said, we don't see too much of him actually fighting, but we do see a little bit of it, and he's clearly, a Fire Lord, so he's clearly a great firebender, but just gonna have to put him in the B tier because we don't really see quite enough to put him any higher than that. Up next, we have Wan Shi Tong, he who knows 10,000 things, the spirit owl with his library in the desert. And, most of the time, spirits, you think they're, like, pretty good at fighting, but to be honest, Wan Shi Tong kind of gets, smacked around. Like, he's, like, trying to, like, bite people with his beak, and he's getting, like, hit by rocks, knocked back. Honestly, not super impressed with Wan Shi Tong's fighting capabilities, and as far as spirits go, pretty underwhelming. He's going to find himself down in the D tier. Up next, we have the Boulder. Honestly, love the Boulder. Me and Sokka, we're both big Boulder guys. We go to almost all of his matches. Huge Boulder fans, season tickets, the whole 9 yards. When it comes to actually fighting, the Boulder in the ring, he's a great fighter. But in terms of like actual combat, he's not exactly the best. In earthbending fighting, it seems like strength is like really the most important thing. Can you throw bigger rocks at the guy than the other guy can throw at you? So sure, in the ring, he's a great fighter, but outside of the ring, to be honest, not the best. He's gonna find himself in a C tier because he's still a strong earthbender, but not exactly the brightest bulb on the tree. Up next, we have Jin Fu. And honestly, for what we see of Jin Fu, I think he's actually a pretty solid earthbender. Maybe not quite as strong as someone like the Boulder, but in terms of, cunning and intelligence, I would say he's definitely got the edge. And I'd say he earned himself a spot in the B tier. Up next, we have Master Yu, I think. I could be wrong on that. I'm drawing a blank. I think it's Master Yu. But yeah, of course, the earthbending academy teacher. But when it comes to the actual earthbending that we see him doing, really unimpressive, honestly. It seems like he's got like the really fundamentals down really well, but actual like complicated moves and we don't really see too much of that in the show. And in terms of decision making, not the brightest guy. So I think he's gonna find himself down in the D tier as well. Last but not least, we have Admiral Zhao. And honestly, this guy loses to Zuko in Season 1. And Zuko Season 1 is not the best fighter. Sure, Zuko's got the, advice from Iroh during the Agni Kai, but Zhao, if you're losing to Zuko Season 1, I gotta be honest, you are not that impressive. He's also gonna find himself down in the C tier. Well, that's my list. Let me know your guys' thoughts, and I hope you enjoyed.